Brand DIYers. It is Mark here on Friday morning and heading into the weekend. I'm excited. I'm going to be heading to Calgary next week and I'll be working out of Calgary. So you'll be watching Brand DIY from Calgary and I'll bring in some special guests from there. And so I'm stoked about that. And I also, I've got a very, very good topic today. And I just, you know what? Sometimes you get topics that are about brands and you go, oh, that's very, very nice and very informative and that'll help everyone, which I love to do. And sometimes you come across topics where you go, this is important. This is really important stuff. It's not just helpful. And let me give you a bit of a backgrounder. If you've read my book, Brand DIY, you can get it at my website, markstoiber.com. Download Brand DIY, free book. It actually inspired this group. The very first section of Brand DIY is how to do effective research. And I believe the way to do effective research is, well, twofold. One, you study people in their natural environment, how they really behave. But if you can't do that because you've got a startup and you don't have a business or stuff on the shelf yet, you ask people questions and you do research with them. And just yesterday, I had three different entrepreneurs in three different contexts ask me what they should do, what their value proposition should be, what they should name their company, and what their company should walk and talk like. And if you followed our live stream yesterday with Courtney Pendenko, she asked, what should actually the clothing line that I design, what should it represent? What sort of a movement should we tap into? So three different people, one day. And the answer to every single one of their questions was the same. You don't have to try so hard to think of what the value prop should be. You don't have to try so hard to think of what your company should walk and talk like. You don't have to try so hard to figure out what sort of a movement your clothing line should tap into. What you have to do is ask questions. Now, the problem with that statement, just ask questions, is that asking the right questions is hard. Asking questions is easy, but asking the right questions is really, really hard. Well, as so often happens when I get something like this on the brain, and I tend to find when you open yourself up to the universe, you start getting stimuli from all over the place, and this is the creative process. This is how creativity works. When you have a problem to solve, you start thinking about it, then, in my case, I go and have a beer and watch Modern Family and fall asleep, and then something pops into my head. And a stimuli comes in, and a story comes in, and somebody calls me. And what happens is if you give it time, if you give the universe time, the universe will provide you with a whole bunch of really cool stuff. And that is exactly what happened. This morning in the New York Times, David Brooks, great journalist and op-ed writer, wrote a story that is, well, actually, I don't get emotional easy, but this story really kind of choked me up because it was how to ask effective questions to be more human. And when I saw the questions that or the way that you ask effective questions, the way David Brooks posed it, I go, my God, if more of us could ask research questions this way, we would have brands that absolutely crushed it. Not only that, but we as humans would be a lot nicer to be around, and we would have better relationships, and we would make better friends. And especially in times of COVID, when we're isolated, we would feel more connected with people. So I'm gonna just tell you what David Brooks wrote, and I want you to bear this in mind. If you are thinking about your brand and you want to make your brand more effective, the way to do it is to ask people questions. But you have to ask good questions. So let's go through what David Brooks had to say about the way to ask good questions. The first thing that he said is if you are going to talk to another human being and ask them questions, approach them with awe. Every human is a little mini miracle, and each of them, whether they're 2 years old or 102 years old, has got something remarkable to say. The problem is that most of us don't recognize this in ourselves or in others. As he said, Lady Randolph Churchill, she's the wife of Winston Churchill's son, once said that when she was sitting next to the statesman William Gladstone, she thought him to be the cleverest person in England. Now, can you imagine if you sat down with somebody, you're doing research on a brand, and you sit down with them, and before you even ask a question, you look at them and you go, you know what? This person has something amazing to tell me. It puts you in a whole different state of mind. Suddenly, it all becomes extremely important. It becomes very important to listen because this person is a miracle and they have got something to say to you that will change your life. Just that, will change the way you ask questions. Second things that David Brooks said, ask elevating questions. Each of us has a way of asking questions that just get us through the day. Do you know how to get here? How much does that cost? Those sort of questions. But imagine if you were asking research questions that put people into almost a cinematic or storytelling place where it forced them to think of themselves in a grand sort of story. So for example, questions like, what crossroads are you at? What commitments have you made that you no longer believe in? Who do you feel most grateful to have in your life? What problem did you used to have, but you've figured out now? Can you imagine sitting down with somebody and asking a few of these questions? You would knock them on their ass because nobody has asked them those questions in a long time, if ever. And it elevates them and it makes their imagination unlock, and it will give you answers that are richer than anything you could imagine. The next thing that David Brooks says, ask open-ended questions. And I find that this is one of the things that I had to learn, and that is one of the hardest things to learn. You know, when you're intercepted at a shopping mall with a student and a clipboard and they ask you research questions, do you believe in this? Yes. Do you think that? No. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. You know they're just trying to get through the interview as quickly as possible because they get paid by the interview. And it's very demoralizing, and it doesn't really make you feel like, you know, jumping up and baking a cake. If you ask questions that are open-ended, or if it's a question that starts with a yes, no, but then you get the 5 or the 6 honest men, who, what, where, when, why, how, you follow up that initial question, digging deeper and deeper. What it forces people to do is peel back the onion and dig into their motivations and their deeper thinking behind their answer. David Brooks has a similar thing. He said, ask an open-ended question. Many of us, you know, we have a horrible tendency to ask questions that imply judgment. Where'd you go to school? You know, did you have a good day? It shuts down the interesting answers, as he says. Better questions start with, what was it like to? Or tell me about a time. Or how did you manage to cope while this was going on? It'll force people to actually analyze their feelings and dig a little bit deeper. And I can tell you the answers are going to be a whole lot more interesting. This next one absolutely slayed me. Make people authors, not witnesses. The important part of people's lives isn't what happened to them, but how they experienced what happened to them, the perception of what happened to them. Now think about this in terms of research. If you have a product, let's say an accounting software, and you want to ask people what they think about their current accounting software, you don't want to ask them, so, you know, what did this software provide? What did it give you, et cetera, et cetera. You want to go, how did you behave? What did you think? What did you do next when this stuff didn't work properly for you? So you make them sort of like an active participant, you know, taking a wider perspective, adding more emotions, transforming it, so that, so you turn it into something where they almost can tell a story about what happened to them, and they go, huh, that's actually a story. That's a pretty interesting story. I'd never even thought of it as a story. This is a big one, the next one. And I can tell you this is one of the hardest things, and I believe that this is one of the hardest things, especially today with our fragmented attention and our Zoom sort of connection to the world. How many of you have ever asked anyone questions about your product, or just been on a Zoom call, with a client, and while they're talking, you go, maybe I'll just check my email while they're talking because they can't see what I'm doing. Or maybe I'll just check my Facebook feed while they're talking. What David Brooks says, treat attention as all attention or no attention. It's an on or an off switch. Now, if you provide total focus to someone, it triggers different things in your brain. It opens up new channels. It gets you thinking of new questions while you're listening really, really hard. You're actively listening. I know for myself, if I'm doing research and I'm tempted to check an email while the person is talking in their answer, no harm done. I'm recording everything, right? Well, there is harm done because there is a subtle sort of signal that goes out from me that I've gone to another place, and the person feels less valued. And the answers don't tend to be as good, and the follow-up questions are terrible. The next tip that he gives, and I think that this is a really powerful one, don't fear the pause. And David Brooks, he says, in Japan, people are taught that after someone provides an answer, it's polite to think about it and don't say anything for up to 8 seconds. So can imagine, you ask me a question, I give you an answer, and then you sit and you think about it for 8 seconds. Now, I don't know how you felt when I just went quiet like that, but I can tell you, if it was happening to me, it would probably make me feel a little bit uncomfortable. And great things happen when people get a little bit uncomfortable because it shakes us out of our easy patterns, it disrupts us, and it makes us connect new dots. So that is going to create a more interesting conversation. Now, another one, and this, I'm not sure how really this applies to the brand, but it does apply to you when you're listening to a person and they're providing an answer. Keep the gem statement front and center. So David Brooks provides an example. He said, when you're talking to someone and you have a disagreement or you have a different perspective than they do in a conversation, it's very helpful to try to remember the motivation underneath anything. So for example, he said, even when we can't agree on Dad's medical care, I've never doubted your good intentions. I know you want the best for him. So if you're doing research and somebody comes at you with a point of view that you don't agree with and you challenge them on that, it's very helpful to see if you can dig a few layers down to figure out what the hidden motivation is behind their answer. It will lead you to great riches, and it'll make you, it'll really pay off. And if you're doing it just as a human in a conversation, I think that it'll make the conversation, especially today in times where we all have polarized points of view, it'll make the conversation really rewarding as opposed to partisan. Find the disagreement under the disagreement. Now, this is interesting because this is something I actually used when I was working on bringing AIM and Trimark together, two mutual fund companies that hated each other. And we brought them together under one roof as one brand. And what we had to do was find a common ground. And the fund managers, the big dogs in each of the companies, they fundamentally disagreed with each other. So what we had to do was actually dig down and dig down and dig down until we found out that actually their disagreement came down to a perception of each other. But what we found far beneath that is that each of them shared one point of view. They said, we do better homework, everybody. They all agreed on that one thing. And then how they did their homework was where they had the big disagreements. So the final thing that David Brooks says, he said to adopt the midwife model when you're doing your questioning, when you're talking to someone. Sometimes people talk to solve a person's problem. But more often, what we're there to do is to help them solve their own problem. And we are just the mentor who is guiding them along at every step of the process. And if you can think of yourself, imagine, I've done this before in research where I go, yeah, that's your problem, that's your problem. If I had a product that could solve that problem and it did this, 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 and this, would that help you? And what they do is go, yeah, I guess that would help me. That's okay, great. And that is often not what people want. They want to actually work through the problem themselves. They want to be listening and going, they want to be talking to you and going, if I did this and I did this and I did this, they want to come up with that themselves. At any rate, that is the story by David Brooks in the New York Times today. I'm going to share it with all of you in the show notes of this live stream. And I can tell you it inspired me, and I'm hoping to pull some of it out for my own research work and just to make myself a better human and a better conversationalist. And I thought it would be very, very useful to share with you. So that is the happy note that I want to leave you with today. And I hope that it's helpful to you. Take a look at the article. I was super inspired by it, and I think it'll make us build better brands and be better humans. Now, final note, like I finish off every live stream, if you know somebody, an entrepreneur, a founder, or even a brand person who needs to be surrounded by folks like us and needs to have a sense of community, ask them to join branddiygroup.com. The more, the messier. We're getting good numbers here. We've got a great group. We've got viewership of these live streams that is starting to go up, up, up. And I'm so stoked to have you here on the journey with me. So there you go. Have yourselves a great Friday and tell all your friends. Take care.